While the first cosmetic nose job didn't happen until the late 1800s, the procedure itself, which was used to help patients who had lost their noses due to war wounds or disease, dates all the way back to around 2,500 years ago. And while other early medical practices like leeching or rubbing animal dung into wounds often caused more harm than good, the methods used by ancient plastic surgeons were surprisingly effective and modern, albeit incredibly painful. So, today, we're going to take a look at the first nose job, which took place in the 6th century. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other medical topics you would like to hear about. Oh look, we got your nose job story right here. So before we really get into it, you need to understand that the historical demand for nose jobs was likely much higher than you probably realize. And there are actually a bunch of good reasons. To start, there has always been innate facial defects that need correction for health reasons. Evidence from regions as widespread as pre-Incan Peru and Roman Scotland shows that people suffered from facial disfigurement, which drove the need for corrective nasal surgery. But an even more common driver of the need for nose jobs was disfiguration as a result of war or political fallout. Historical evidence shows that some rulers really enjoyed humiliating their enemies by cutting off their noses. This punishment could create problems for the victims beyond the obvious physical ones, especially in cultures that believed in bodily resurrection, where cutting off someone's nose could permanently handicap them in the afterlife. For centuries, women accused of wrongdoing underwent nasal disfigurement as punishment. In the medieval period, for example, a woman might lose her nose for disobedience or because she was viewed as sexually promiscuous. Examples of such harsh treatment include a Vandal king who at the fall of Rome thought his wife was plotting against him, so he ordered the disfigurement of her nose and ears. In Jerusalem during the 10th century, women who committed adultery could be punished by cutting off their nose. In fact, many societies cut off criminals' noses as punishment. In the ancient period, pharaohs used this form of punishment under the Code of Hammurabi, an Egyptian law. Similarly, during the medieval period, nasal disfigurement helped identify people found guilty of treason. During the Tudor era in England, anyone who spread lies about the king could have their nose or ears amputated. And a 16th century pope scared off highway robbers threatening Rome by decreeing any man caught robbing people would have their nose cut off. The punishment stood for so many centuries that individuals with nose deformities from disease or war injuries may have pursued nose jobs just to avoid misidentification as a criminal. The first nose job in history dates all the way back to the 6th century BC. The process was detailed in the Hindu Sanskrit writings of Sushruta, an Indian physician who today is widely regarded in India as the father of surgery. Among other procedures, Sushruta's book, known as the Sushruta Samhita, recorded the practice of surgically restoring damaged or missing noses. However, unlike the nose jobs of today, which are often performed for cosmetic reasons, Sushruta's patients included people disfigured by disease, wounded in battle, and those who had lost their noses as punishment for adultery or theft. To help these individuals, the doctor used a method that's not too different from what modern plastic surgeons do. He surgically created a flap of skin and rotated it to cover the damaged nose. In fact, his book contains the very first recorded description of a forehead flap rhinoplasty, a procedure that is still used today. Surgeons continued to use Sushruta's method in India for more than 2,000 years, well into the 19th century. For those looking to get an old-school style nose job, Sushruta's aforementioned text explains how to create the artificial nose. First, the leaf of a creeper, long and broad enough to fully cover the whole of the severed or clipped part, should be gathered. Now to be clear, a creeper in this sense is a small viney plant that grows close to the ground, and its purpose was to give the physician a template to the size of the wound that would have to be covered by new flesh. But that was just step one. From there, a patch of living flesh, equal in dimensions to the preceding leaf, should be sliced off, from down upward, from the region of the cheek, and after scarifying it with a knife, swiftly adhered to the severed nose. The text then recommended a cool-headed physician wrap up the area and let the patient rest. If the procedure succeeded, the skin would graft to the nose. Now, while that might sound easy enough, keep in mind this would have been long before the advent of anesthesia. Moreover, the tools used for early nose jobs, which included gripping devices and knives, made the procedure painful and time-consuming. Those factors likely deterred many from undergoing a nose job procedure and helps explain why the first known nose job for cosmetic purposes did not occur until the late 1800s. According to Sushruta's ancient manual, after adhering a flap of skin to the patient's nose, the physician should insert 2 small pipes into the nostrils to facilitate respiration and to prevent the adhered flesh from hanging down. The physician then dusted the area with restorative powders and sesame oil. Meanwhile, the patient, while waiting for the procedure to work, had to drink clarified butter and take purgatives. If someone told you they were going to whip your ass, then sew your butt to your face, you'd probably think that person was a bully, threatening you. But historically speaking, you'd be wrong. You see, for centuries, to replace defects on the nose, Indian surgeons would transplant skin from other parts of the body. Some texts recommend cutting off skin from the buttocks to attach to the face. And to prepare the thicker butt skin, doctors used an unusual method. They flayed the skin with a whip so the skin would swell and bruise, then cut off the skin to graft to the face. Some believe the whipping produced a thinner skin layer, which would have a better chance of healing and grafting to the nose. Did the whole world smell like a bathroom to a person whose nose was made from their rear? Probably not, though it's safe to assume it probably led to a bunch of jokes. Since its entry into the historical record, syphilis has always been bad news. And while the world surely always desired a cure, the first order of business after its earliest recorded major outbreaks seems to have been figuring out who to blame. Most countries chose to pin it on their neighbors or enemies. For example, records show the residents of Russia called it the Polish disease, while the Polish called it the German disease. England called it the French disease, while the French called it the Neapolitan disease. The Portuguese called it the Spanish disease, the Turks called it the Christian disease, and both the Hindus and the Muslims blamed each other. Regardless of who was to blame, the disease caused disfigurement, hair loss, and soft tissue decay, which could destroy the suffering patient's nose. During Europe's major outbreak of syphilis, long before effective treatments emerged, the disease even came to carry a social stigma. By the 16th century, Europeans just generally began to associate facial disfigurements with disease and infection. This in turn drove the desire for nose jobs. And at the time, the most common procedure grafted arm skin to the patient's face to create a new nose. Gaspare Tagliacozzi was a professor of anatomy and surgery at the University of Bologna, who, in 1597, wrote a surgery book called De Curtorum Chirurgia per Incitationum, or in English, The Surgery of Defects by Implantations. Among other things, the book, which was written in Latin, described how to create a nose for men who suffered facial injuries in battle. While it might have been effective, the procedure was not easy on the patient. The surgeon attached skin from the patient's upper arm to his head, forcing the patient to remain in place for 3 weeks while the arm skin grafted to the nose. The book even includes an illustration of a patient wearing a brace that holds the arm in place at the face, and it looks very uncomfortable. But at least once the 3 weeks were up, the patient was good to go. Right? No. Actually, the patient then had to wait another 2 weeks before the surgeon formed the flap of skin into a nose-like shape, completing the nose job. Patient patience is a virtue. In the 16th century, Gaspare Tagliacozzi introduced European doctors to his procedure for grafting arm skin to the nose, a 5-week-long ordeal many patients understandably wanted to avoid. Luckily for the noseless of the world, there was an option. The alternative to the painful and awkward surgery was a prosthetic nose made of gold or silver. Ambroise Paré, a French surgeon, suggested using prosthetic devices to hide nose deformities or injuries. The device is attached to the face with a string around the head. One famous historical figure who opted for the prosthetic was astronomer Tycho Brahe, who lost part of his nose in a 1566 duel, and thereafter wore a skin-colored metal nose. In a macabre twist, a grave robber stole the prosthetic nose after Brahe died. For many people throughout history, the nose was a window into a person's character. Metaphorically, of course. Don't look into anyone's nose. Around the 19th century, some people started to want to change their nose because certain nose shapes were allegedly more desirable. This desirability had racial undertones. The public considered straight or small noses, for example, as more refined and attractive. while more prominent or curved noses suggested a cunning look or a lack of moral character. This being the case, members of some ethnic populations that were tarnished with such stereotypes, such as European Jews, began to get nose jobs to make them look more American. The first nose job for cosmetic purposes did not occur until the late 1800s. But the procedure became common for Hollywood actors and actresses around the 1930s, and it only got more popular from there. In fact, by the year 2000, over 400,000 Americans had nose jobs annually. Since then, however, the number has fallen, according to MarketWatch, with only around 225,000 Americans undergoing the procedure each year. So what do you think? Would you ever get cosmetic surgery? For what part of your body? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.